Hi, ladies. I am so sorry I am not there to go through the lawmaking process, the legislative process with you guys today, but I'm going to do it the best I can from home. And I think most of you guys know what a bill is already. It's a law that's not a law yet. It might eventually become one, and it also might not eventually become one, but it's a proposed law. It's also short for William, of course, but that's neither here nor there. In addition to bills, another type of legislation is a resolution, which is a measure that's passed that sort of makes a statement. It doesn't really have the force of law. It sometimes authorizes presidential military action on the very serious side. It can also be a very ceremonial commendation of someone on the other side. I think in 2013, John Yarmuth went to Congress and had the House of Representatives pass a resolution that commended the achievements of the U of L basketball team winning the national championship, which it turns out they didn't actually win, but that's neither here nor there. So bills and resolutions, both types of legislation. We're going to talk about the legislative process today. So we'll kind of, in an imaginary way, go through the process of a bill becoming a law. But first, there are a few terms that we want to cover. And what I need to explain about this is that often we think about laws as being very simple, short statements, almost like they're a line from the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill. But the reality is that most laws are very, very long and complicated. In fact, in the book I use for the AP class, it actually mentions that if you print out the Obamacare law in normal font size, it's about 1,400 pages long and weighs about 6 pounds. So these things are often very complicated, and the reason I bring that up is to help you understand what we mean when we talk about a rider. Okay, a rider is something you're going to add into a bill that probably usually doesn't seem that related to what the bill itself is actually about, but you're sliding it in, and it's often something that's not very popular. It could be, say, a new tax that would be unlikely to pass on its own, but if you make it part of a bigger law, a bigger bill, something that's a little bit more popular. Let's say it's something that's going to improve education and it's very popular. You make this unrelated tax part of that law, you hope it, let's use the term, rides through the system on the strength of the more popular bill that it's attached to. And sometimes, to move down to the next term, sometimes there are so many of these hanging off of a particular bill that we call it a Christmas tree bill, because the riders are simply hanging all over the bill, metaphorically speaking, like Christmas trees. Finally, the last term I'll bring up is earmarking. This has become kind of a dirty word in politics. In campaigns, you don't want to be accused of earmarking money, but really all it is sort of voting for legislation that's going to direct money back towards your home district, the district that you represent, or the state that you represent in Congress. And to be fair, we tend to vote for people who are going to go get us stuff from Washington. So, it can be seen as a good thing or a bad thing, but it's essentially voting for money that's going to be directed towards a project, maybe building a new bridge of some kind, a new facility, a new arena, whatever, in your home area that you represent. Okay, so let's talk about the process of making a law. Now, anyone can write a bill. Often lobbyists will do it, members of the White House staff will do it. A bill can be written by anyone, but it can only be introduced by a member of Congress. And typically, we've talked about this before, it's going to be introduced first in the House of Representatives if it's going to involve taxing the people in any way. It can't be introduced in the Senate if that is the case. And they'll actually drop it into this physical box known as the hopper. And although I haven't seen it, I hear the hopper comes up in the second Legally Blonde movie. I've only seen the first one. But I hear the hopper is mentioned. They're passing Bruiser's bill about the animal testing or whatever. And it gets dropped into the hopper in the House of Representatives. So it gets dropped in, it gets a first reading, it's going to get a number that starts with HR if it's a House bill, S if it's a Senate bill. Now, we talked about committees in a previous class. So once it's been introduced, it doesn't go straight in front of the whole House of Representatives or the whole Senate. It gets referred to the appropriate standing committee. If it's a bill related to farming, it might go to that committee on agriculture, nutrition, and forestry. So the committee can do lots of things with it. They'll often form subcommittees that will hold hearings. They'll bring in people to testify, experts to give their opinions and present testimony that informs Congress's consideration of the bill. But ultimately, the committee has a lot to say. This is where a lot of the work of Congress happens. And many bills let's use the word on the screen here, are pigeonholed. They simply don't have enough support within the committee, so they die right there in the committee. If they hang around for a long time, a member can file a thing called a discharge petition to try to force it to the floor for a vote. You don't need to know a whole lot about discharge petitions, but ultimately it's either going to die in committee, or in some cases the committee will report favorably on the bill, and it's then that you're going to vote to send it to the actual floor of the House of Representatives, where they will debate on it and eventually bring the bill up for a vote. But before it goes to the full floor of the House of Representatives, it has to make one last stop at something else we talked about in a previous class, the House Rules Committee, who will grant the rule on each bill. They'll set the time frame, the time limits for speakers, who's going to speak, the exact manner and the exact schedule on which that bill will be debated on the floor of the House of Representatives. They're on a timer when they talk in the House of Representatives, and they talk very fast usually because they're trying to get everything in that they want to say before their time expires, and they'll cut them off mid-sentence if they need to. But ultimately, once it stops at the House Rules Committee, the so-called traffic cop of the House, because all bills have to stop there, textbooks love that analogy. Eventually, it will go to the floor of the House of Representatives from the Rules Committee, and they will debate it, and they will vote on it according to the rules that had been set by the Rules Committee. Now, not every member has to be present for every vote. You need what's called a quorum, a majority of the membership to be present, and sometimes members do miss votes. But ultimately, they're going to debate it according to the rules set by the Rules Committee, and then they're going to call for a vote, and they actually vote electronically in the House now. When I got to visit the House chamber and watch them in action, there's almost like a scoreboard kind of thing going on there to tally everything up. So they're going to debate it, they're going to vote on it, approved bills will be signed by the Speaker and taken to the Senate, because remember, you need both houses of Congress in order to make a law. Now, the Senate is where things can get pretty weird. In some ways, the process is the same. You're still going to refer it to the appropriate standing committee. The committee will still either vote to send it to the floor or they won't. But in a lot of ways, the Senate's process is less formal. Remember, there's not this big room of 435 people. There are only 100 of them. And there's also no rules committee setting all these specific time limits and things like that. And in the absence of really strict rules, typically the majority party is able to kind of call the shots, which is why it's such a big deal to be the Senate majority leader. Okay, so the majority leader can usually call bills to the floor as he or she pleases. So they still debate it, but again, there are no time limits, and that's going to lead to something very interesting we're going to talk about just a few minutes down the road. But still, they will debate it, and then they'll vote in one of two ways. Sometimes they'll just call for a voice vote. All in favor say yay, all opposed say nay, and if there's a clear winner, they may just leave it at that, and nothing's actually recorded, just that the bill either passed or didn't. But sometimes they may also call for a roll call vote, and that is exactly what it sounds like. Each senator's name is called, and he or she stands, casts his or her vote, and it's recorded as a matter of public record, as all votes in the House of Representatives are. Now, as an example of one of these types of votes, I'm going to have you guys watch a short clip from a few years ago when the Republicans, shortly after President Trump took office, were attempting to repeal and replace the Obamacare law, and they thought they had the votes to do it. All of the Democrats were voting against it, but the Republicans controlled the Senate, and it was sort of really late night. I believe it was past midnight session in which the Republicans thought they were going to get this accomplished. And then this really dramatic thing happened when the recently deceased Senator John McCain was out of the room when his name was called. I believe he'd gone to the restroom, and he comes back in, and there's this really dramatic moment where they realize it isn't going to pass. So I'm going to have you guys watch that clip now. I'll pause this video and move over to that one. Now, here's where things get really crazy. Like I said, there are no specific time limits in the Senate, and that leads to this really interesting strategy called the filibuster, which was rarely used early in the country's history, but has become increasingly common. And a filibuster is essentially a senator takes the floor and refuses to give it up. You simply keep talking in order to delay action or prevent something from taking place. They can take a lot of different forms, but it's basically just talking a bill to death in order to delay an outcome that you don't want to happen. And the weird thing is, you don't even have to stay on topic. People have read the phone book on the floor of the U.S. Senate. They have read the dictionary. Texas Senator Ted Cruz once read Green Eggs and Ham by Dr. Seuss on the floor of the United States Senate. It can get pretty wild. So what I'm going to have you guys, there is a way to end a filibuster, as you see there, what's called invoking cloture, but you need 60 senators to do that in most cases. There are a few exceptions to that rule. And it's rare that either party, Democrats or Republicans, has 60 members in the Senate. When they do, it's what's called a supermajority, a filibuster-proof majority, but it doesn't happen that often. So filibusters can be a really effective way to stall things. The record by Senator Strom Thurmond from South Carolina back in the 1950s was a filibuster of, I believe it was nearly 25 hours. But the example I'm going to have you guys watch today is a quick little time lapse of Kentucky Senator Rand Paul doing a filibuster just a few years ago. And I'll try to set this clip up for you. Rand Paul is a big fan of the Bill of Rights, and he is very passionate about the whole Bill of Rights, and especially the Fifth Amendment in this case. He wanted the Obama administration, this is when President Obama was still in office, to be clear that it was not okay to use drone military strikes to take out American citizens, even ones suspected of terrorism, without first, in a non-combat situation, without first apprehending that person and giving them their due process, their fair trial, and all of those things as required by the Fifth Amendment. He wanted to make sure that drone strikes were not an allowable way to take them out. He believed the Constitution is very clear about this sort of thing. He believed that President Obama had not been clear enough about this. So, at a time when President Obama had nominated a new person to head the CIA, a guy named John Brennan, Rand Paul decided this was his moment to stand in the Senate while the Senate was going to vote on whether or not to approve, to confirm President Obama's choice of John Brennan, and Rand Paul was going to stand and filibuster his nomination until he got an answer from the president, from the White House, making it clear that these sort of drone strikes against American citizens in non-combat situations would not be allowable. So you guys can pause right here and then watch the Rand Paul filibuster clip to get an idea of what this might look like. Notice the timestamps on the screen. This goes on for nearly 13 hours. So notice the timestamps on the screen, and we'll pick up here after you guys have watched that clip. Actually, cancel that. Move on to the second notes video after you watch the clip, because I'm actually running out of time on my 15-minute time limit on this one, and we'll have plenty of time to discuss the last two slides on the next video. So watch the clip and then start the second notes video at that time.